These plaques that are embedded in the sidewalk each describe a great African American with a connection to this neighborhood. This is from Dr. Riley Ransom Sr.'s biography.
I was just reading about him the other night, the first African-American surgeon in Tarrant County. I absolutely did a lot of things for this community.
I like this little segment from his book. He says, "This little book is not written for the purpose of educating anyone or to point out some high philosophical truth. It is simply written to demonstrate the fact that a humble black boy with ambition and faith in the architect of the universe can realize his goal if he will earnestly and honestly work toward that end." Now that is profound.
In the Western culture, when we're talking about cowboys, we're talking about life on the range. It didn't matter what your color was. If you could handle a horse, you were considered an equal.
Railroad men were the backbones of our community.
That's the reason why this city is so great, because we had the kinds of educators that cared about the students.
I can remember a lot of these things firsthand.
I can still hear the hum of the activity in the community.
I'll be a Panther, who be you?
I'll be a Wildcat.
What?
Absolutely, my brother, you know that.
We don't want to erase our history, no matter how negative some of it was. We want to tell it. There were many black communities in Fort Worth. There wasn't just one. And that's what made Fort Worth different than most southern cities and certainly most Texas cities. Most cities in the South had one black area, either across the river or across the railroad tracks or wherever. Fort Worth had black communities in every quadrant of the city and in the central part of the city.
Mosher Valley, which was established by ex-slave. Baptist Hill, which is right across from the old I.M. Terrell High School, and is where Butler Housing Community now sits. The Rock Island Bottoms is a historic community. Of course, Riverside and Como, the south side where we're now standing, Tresvant Hill and Greenway were all historic neighborhoods. And I remember going to school with kids from each one of those neighborhoods.
Stop Six is the community that was originally settled by African American citizens. Really? Many inner city communities were first settled by other people, Anglos, and when they left the community, then the African Americans moved in and sort of took over the community. Just like the community we're in, Poly used to be a working class white community, but you look around now, it's African American and Hispanic, it's a community of color. But Stop Six is one of those communities that the original settler of that community were African American people. The first person that's credited with founding that community was Miss Amanda Davis. That Amanda Street is now named for her, and Amanda Street is still there. She still has direct descendants.
Amanda Davis was my great-grandmother. She had been a servant, basically. She worked, earned her money, went and bought the land and settled it. People were already beginning to buy land in different places. They understood that land, more than anything else, was the most precious thing you could own.
William McDonald helped to grow this city. He helped to grow this city, being the first black millionaire here in Fort Worth.
He was a son of slaves from Kaufman County, east of here. And he was educated and became an educator and a teacher first.
I wish I had had an opportunity to meet him, because I understand that he was also responsible for many persons, many residents in this neighborhood, historic Terrell Heights, to buy their own properties and to live here, which was a huge contribution to the city. Fraternal Bank and Trust.
There was a full commercial district in downtown Fort Worth that went from about where the convention center is now all the way down to the courthouse. And for at least 10 blocks, there were black businesses, law offices, a theater, the hotel, restaurants, a hospital.
Dr. Ransom had his hospital there. They had a hotel there, the Jim Hotel, that was built by Bill Gooseneck McDonald.
No, I can't tell you about Jim Hotel. I can tell you what I've heard. At the Jim Hotel was the hotel to stay in for all of the dignitaries that came into Fort Worth because they couldn't stay in the hotels downtown Fort Worth.
The musicians would come. They'd come to play for the whites at their hotel, but after they left their gigs, as they were called, they'd go to the gym and play all night for free.
I used to hang out at the Gym Hotel as a little boy, trying to grow up. And Ike and Tina Turner and all those type of people who would sing at the Gym Hotel. And not only that, talking about Cooper, do you remember the cab company named Cooper Cab?
Seems like I remember that. Remember, I'm not as old as you.
Well, that's keep living and you can get here. My point is that his Cooper's kinfolks opened that business. There was Lionel Cooper's kinfolks that opened that cab company. So you had the hotel, and everybody had to get to the hotel around town. So the cab service was Cooper Cab Service. So they had an enterprise going. That building was torn down, as you know, and it was right across the street from a church, Mount Gilead. That's still down there right now.
It's the only piece of property in downtown Fort Worth owned by African Americans today is the Mount Gilead Baptist Church. It's still there.
It's still there. So the hotel was across the street from the church. It'd take a whole nother decade to tell you some stories between the hotel and the church. Same people kind of thing, you know?
The art piece that hangs on the wall just outside of where the colored waiting room was at the old TNP train station. It's a salute to the Pullman porters. Those were great middle-class jobs. Guys who, as they used to say, ran on the railroad and provided service to passengers running up and down the TNP and other lines.
My father worked here at the TNP station, and I think this tells about Garfield Thompson, who was a state representative, but he was a railroad man first. And railroad men were the backbones of our community. They had jobs that paid much better than the jobs that people had here in town, even at the packing houses. They had a petition between this fabulous look here and this fabulous look over here. There was a petition, and you could get your ticket over here. That was the waiting room, and over here, this was the white waiting room. This concourse has always been a concourse. To us, it didn't look any different than the other one, except it was larger. Hello. So we were so busy getting in and out of it, we didn't care what it looked like. Nobody complained about it. We accepted the fact that we were segregated.
We added to that memorial, to that sculpture down there, a bench that came out of the colored waiting room. What we were saying is that we don't want to erase our history, no matter how negative some of it was. We want to tell it.
I had graduated from Illinois Wesleyan in Bloomington, Illinois. Sent him my credentials. They sent me back letter saying, "We will interview you." So I went into Dr. Trice's office, and he said, "Well, I'm not going to hire you. You know that." And I said, "No, I don't know that, and I'd like to know why." And he said, "Because you've been dishonest. What have I been untruthful about?" He said, "Well, that's not a colored school. Coloreds don't go to that school. How would you go to that school? Your name, that's not a colored name." And I said, "Well, Dr. Price, you have a PhD. Surely you understand about the name."
When the influx of African Americans began to move into the Anglo communities, and Terrell Heights was one of them, we had doctors, lawyers, educators.
We had grocery stores, a department store. I mean, a really nice department store on scale with Monnings downtown, which was one of the nicest stores. Okay, Embers had nice stuff, and you could walk to the store.
Remember reading an article about Dr. Ransom, okay? Well,
Yes.
his house is still there on Terrell Avenue, correct?
His house is still there. The home of Dr. Monkus is still there. The home of Dr. Burnett is still there.
I can still hear the hum of the activity in the community because it was always busy. It was always thriving. There was always something to do.
I Am Terrell, the school that I went to, which was the original black high school in Fort Worth, and not only served Fort Worth, but served at least 18 other cities.
To talk about I Am Terrell High School is to talk about the history of Black Fort Worth.
Terrell has a lot of history because it was the only school that people of color could go to back in the day. And people from several counties, as you know, came from around from Weatherford, a little place out here called Birdville, Mansfield, all came to I Am Terrell, and it was a conglomerate of a lot of talent.
The teachers that we had in high school, most of those people had PhDs.
There were many distinguished graduates of I Am Terrell. Doctors, lawyers, musicians, diplomats. I Am Terrell produced Ornette Coleman and Dewey Redmond and King Curtis Owsley, and the list just goes on and on and on.
You can imagine that the buzz and the hum in that school and the energy that you felt, it was just there all around you, the teachers, everything was moving towards that mountaintop that Martin Luther King was talking about. It was lots of energy.
What people don't understand is they think that Brown versus Board of Education desegregated schools in the United States. It didn't. It set the legal framework for it. Once that decision was decided, saying that the dual public education system is illegal, it's not like systems all over the South just decided, okay, well, let's desegregate our schools because the Supreme Court said so. That's not what happened. What happened is that there had to be individual lawsuits brought against individual districts alleging that they were now in violation of that Supreme Court decision. Okay. And Judge Davis filed that lawsuit.
I was consulted by the local chapter of the NAACP to see what we could do about it. And I had handled the Mansfield case, which was started in 55. And in 56, when we started trying to go there, the mob gathered, and it wasn't safe for us to go there, so we did not go. In 59, we filed a suit to integrate so that people could go to the school nearest to them.
Judge Davis litigated that suit, and he is responsible for desegregating Fort Worth public schools. We have an elementary school named for him, L. Clifford Davis Elementary.
We are gradually beginning to realize that the truth of the fact is we all want the same thing.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
And what's good for one is good for all. And we are interdependent so that there's value in diversity. All people have something to bring to the table.
Yes.
And all people can make some contribution some way or other. We have different talents, but and different interests. And that's the beauty of life, is the diversity that exists in the society.
Dion Bagsby was elected in the late 80s, but there had to have been a lot of other things that was happening prior to that time.
There was a lot happening, and there always was an attempt to get representation for the Black community. There was an incumbent in that seat who was very popular. It took 8 years or so, maybe 10 years, for the Black community to actually claim the commissioner's court seat. One of the things that happened was that he made some very misogynistic remarks related to women. And that created an opportunity for a woman, and in particular, a Black woman named Dion Bagsby, to take him on.
I flew to D. Kelly's office and I said, Mr. Kelly, I've done something very, very foolish. I said, there are a group of women who have talked me into this. And Mr. Kelly listened to me. And I said, I can't raise the money for this. There's just no way. And Mr. Kelly said, you're right. You can't raise the money. And it's going to be difficult. Dee's been there 20 years. He's well and trapped and all. He said, but you know what? I've watched you. And you know how to raise an army. And he said, I'm not telling you you're going to win. He said, but if you raise an army, you may have a shot. So my band of angels, old, new, young, Black, white, just all came together and said, we're going to win this thing. And they did.
In the Western culture, when we're talking about cowboys, we're talking about life on the range. It didn't matter what your color was. If you could handle a horse, if you were good with cattle, if you could handle a rope, right? If you worked hard, right? You were considered an equal. Unfortunately, society, 140 years later, hasn't quite caught up to the dream of what they did back then. But the goal is always for us to press forward, so that so what happened back then on the trail, or what happens in the cowboy world, it spills over into mainstream society. And we'd like to see more of that.
History is not just about the dates. It's about political. It's about your dress. It's about the community that you live in. It's about even the language that you use to express yourself.
The question might be asked, what are we talking about with all of this history of Black Fort Worth stuff? What are the lessons to be learned? What do you actually do with it? And I think that by studying the past, you're more able to chart a course for the future.
I invite you to take the time and go down and look and see how history made the city of Fort Worth great as it is today.
I think there's one of your mom here also.
It's right here.
I'd love this quote. I never stop to think about being proud of what I've done. I just do what I am going to do and move on. So great. It's such a great quote.
Dedicated community servant